The sour orange fate saw her across the opulent Great Hall of the Prado Museum, and his bile rose like cheap champagne. It was Celia Vega, his ex-wife, whom he had discarded like a rusty ornament. He smiled smugly, examining her simple black dress, a pathetic little bird in a hall full of peacocks. She was working at the party, serving the same people he played golf with. It was too perfect. He decided then and there to humiliate her once and for all, to show everyone that he had never been wrong. He approached, a cruel sneer in his face, ready to publicly humiliate her. But he made a fatal mistake. He didn't see the man watching from the alcove, the billionaire host, powerful and reserved, who was about to introduce Celia in a way that would shatter Ricardo's entire world. The air in the grand hall was thick with the scent of money. It was a physical thing, an intoxicating perfume of old wealth, new ambition, and the faint floral touch of 1,000 hothouse lilies. For Celia Vega, it was the scent of anxiety. She stood in the shadow of an imposing Roman arch, her fingers nervously pleating the sleeve of her black dress. Simple, elegant, and borrowed, she wasn't a guest. She was, in a way, the attraction, or rather, the guardian of the attraction. As junior curator of European painting, the newly opened Caballero wing was her work, her triumph, her masterpiece, fueled by the passion and stress of 18-hour days. Tonight was its grand opening, a gala designed to extract 7-figure donations from the people milling about, sipping champagne that cost more than his monthly rent. And he would be there. Ricardo Eduardo. The name still weighed heavily on his stomach, even after 2 years. 2 years since the divorce was finalized. 2 years since he had sat across from her in a sterile law office and called his life's work a quaint little hobby. "Celia," he had said, his voice dripping with that condescending tone that still haunted her nightmares. "I'm building an empire. I need a partner, not a librarian." Carla understands the stakes. Carla, the 24-year-old model he'd been seeing for 6 months before Celia even found the hotel receipts. Carla, now Carla Eduardo, adorned with the diamonds Celia had returned, living in the penthouse Celia had decorated. Celia clutched the laminated staff badge, tucked away in her silk handbag. She wasn't a librarian. She was an art historian, and a damn good one. This exhibition, securing loans, authenticating the new Vermeer acquisition, overseeing the restoration of a 17th century Dutch still life. This was her empire. Only it was built with canvases and pigments, not stock options and hostile takeovers. "Are you okay, Elle?" Celia jumped. It was Sarah, her colleague and friend, with 2 glasses of champagne. Sarah was flushed, her eyes sparkling with the glamour of it all. "Just nerves," Celia lied, taking a sip of her own glass. "Making sure the Daheim lighting doesn't wash out the chiaroscuro." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Only you would worry about 17th century lighting techniques when Javier Bardem is sitting next to caviar. Relax. We did it. The wing is impressive. Dr. Alarcón is already crying tears of joy and drinking top-shelf whiskey. Dr. Alarcón is nervous about the guest of honor," Celia murmured, scanning the crowd. "The man himself, Dylan Chevalier, the ghost," Sarah whispered, leaning in. "They say he's richer than God and twice as secretive. Can you believe he financed this entire wing without ever having seen it? And this is the first time he's set foot in it?" "His office was peculiar," Celia said, recalling months of terse, precise emails from a faceless assistant. All he cared about was the Vermeer. He wanted weekly reports on the restoration. "Well, you're about to see the best work of your life," Sarah said, squeezing her arm. "You deserve tonight, Celia. Don't let anything or anyone ruin it." Celia felt this, but her gaze shifted back to the main entrance. She knew Ricardo. He wasn't just on the museum board. He was a patron. He had bought access, just like he bought everything else. He wouldn't miss the opportunity to act, to see and be seen. And then, as if summoned by his fear, he appeared. Ricardo Eduardo was a man who didn't just enter a room. He conquered it. Tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his blonde hair perfectly styled. He was handsome, with the sharp, predatory look of a hawk, and on his arm, dripping emeralds that matched her dress, was Carla. She was breathtakingly beautiful. With a practiced, empty smile, Celia felt the air leave her lungs. It was an involuntary, physical reaction. The old panic, the feeling of being small, of not being enough, clawed at her throat. Instinctively, she sank deeper into the shadow of the arch, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was a curator. She was a professional. I was terrified. Ricardo's eyes swept the room, a king inspecting his court. He laughed, shook hands with a senator, patted a hedge fund rival on the back. She was in her element. Celia was just part of the scenery. Just breathe, she whispered to herself, gripping the champagne glass so tightly she was surprised it didn't shatter. She won't even see you. You're just personal. But just as the thought crossed her mind, Ricardo's gaze caught on her. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of something? Annoyance? No, it was recognition. And then, the last thing she wanted to see, contempt. She pushed Carla, whispering something in her ear. Carla glanced over, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow furrowed in confusion before a slow, contemptuous smile spread across her face. Ricardo turned his back on her, resuming his conversation. But the shot had been fired. He had seen her, and he knew she was here, on the sidelines. The night, which was supposed to be her triumph, suddenly felt like a trap. Celia spent the next hour in a state of heightened evasion. She moved through the peripheral galleries, checking on her guides, speaking in hushed tones to museum donors she recognized, and using her work as a shield. He found a strange solace in art itself. He would pause before a small portrait by Franz Holz, marveling at the vibrant, breathing energy of the brushstrokes. The man in the painting had been dead for 400 years, yet his trusting gaze met his own. It was a reminder that some things endure. Financial empires rise and fall, fashions fade, but true mastery, true passion, were eternal. Ricardo, meanwhile, was the center of attention. Celia could hear his loud, confident laughter echoing off the marble floors. He was positioned near the entrance to the new wing, as if he were personally welcoming people to his exhibition. She watched him gesture expansively, talking to a group of men in tailored suits. Probably, Celia thought with a pang, he was telling them about his generous contributions to the arts, neglecting to mention that he had once tried to persuade Celia to sell her grandmother's antique medallion to help with the down payment on her first apartment. The divorce had been brutal, not only emotionally, but financially. Ricardo's legal team, led by the infamous Tiburon Sanchez, had painted Celia as a gold digger, even though she had been the one supporting them both while Ricardo earned his MBA. They argued that his art history hobby was a frivolous expense and that she had no right to the wealth he had generated. In the end, to escape, to be free, Celia had left with almost nothing. Only her books, her clothes, and a settlement so small it was an insult. She had rebuilt her life from scratch, her small, rent-controlled apartment, her long hours at the museum for a salary that Ricardo spent in a single weekend in Marbella. But it was hers. Her independence was her most prized possession. Miss Vega? Celia turned around. A small, elderly woman, with eyes as bright and sharp as a bird's, was smiling at her. She wore a vintage Chanel suit and a stunning pearl necklace. Mrs. Allister, Celia smiled, her professional warmth instantly returning. What a pleasure to see you. Are you enjoying the exhibition? Mrs. Allister, Millicent Allister, was one of the museum's oldest and most respected patrons. She was old money, in a way that Ricardo, with his flamboyant hedge fund, never would be. Enjoying! Mrs. Allister's voice was a fragile, papery whisper. My dear, it's a revelation. The Vermeer. I saw it in The Hague. What have you done? The light. You found the light again. My late husband Charles would have loved this. He always said that a curator could be judged not by what they exhibited, but by what they revealed. Tears stung Celia's eyes. That's why she did it. Not for the galas, not for the money, but for this. Because of the connection. Thank you, Mrs. Allister. That means more than you know. Nonsense, my dear. It's the truth. She patted Celia on the arm. Now, I hear that this mysterious Mr. Chevalier is finally gracing us with his presence. I'm half convinced he doesn't exist. He's probably a shell corporation. He's real, I assure you. Celia laughed. Although I've only dealt with his office, he's very private. He also arrives very late. Mrs. Allister snorted, examining a delicate Cartier watch. Dr. Alarcon looks like she's about to have a stroke. She's been hovering around the podium for 20 minutes. Celia glanced over. Mrs. Allister was right. Her boss, a kind but perpetually nervous woman, was visibly sweating, her eyes darting back and forth toward the entrance. The main event, the speech and official ribbon-cutting ceremony for the ALA, was scheduled to happen any moment. The guest of honor's absence was becoming noticeable. A small, satisfied smile crossed Celia's face. Ricardo Eduardo noticed. He also seemed impatient. He was in a small circle with a man Celia recognized as Marcos Olmedo, a tech billionaire rumored to be in merger talks with Chevalier Corporation. Ricardo was clearly desperate for a presentation. Her entire performance tonight was probably directed toward this one meeting. Well, said Mrs. Allister, if she doesn't appear, it should be you who gives the speech, Miss Vega. You're the one with the passion. Not all of these suits. She gave Ricardo's group a knowing look, making Celia's smile widen. I'll stick to the art, Mrs. Allister. What a shame. As Mrs. Allister walked away, Celia felt a small, fortified core of confidence. She knew what she was doing. He had earned his place here. Ricardo and his poses suddenly seemed less monolithic. He needed a moment of peace before the speeches began. The main hall was becoming oppressive. He slipped down a side corridor into the gallery of Dutch masters, his favorite, and currently empty. It was quieter here, the lights dimmed, the air fresher. She wasn't alone. A man stood in the middle of the room, his back to her. He was tall, dressed in a black tuxedo so perfectly tailored, it seemed almost an extension of him. No flashy watch, no diamond earrings. Just quiet, absolute quality. I wasn't looking at the main attraction, the great Rembrandt portrait. He was staring at a small, unassuming painting in the corner. A Vanitas by Peter Cloyce, a study of a skull, an overturned glass, and a candle going out. He seemed completely absorbed, a man at ease in silence. Celia, not wanting to disturb him, began to back away. It's the lemon, he said, his voice a deep, soft baritone, with a faint European accent impossible to place. He didn't turn around, did he? Celia froze. I'm sorry. He finally turned around, and Celia felt a different kind of shock. One that had nothing to do with fear. He wasn't conventionally handsome like Ricardo. His features were more severe, more defined, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark and intelligent they seemed to see right through you. He looked to be in his late 40s, his black hair brushed with a distinguished silver streak at the temples. The lemon, he repeated, pointing at the painting. Everyone stares at the skull, the symbol of death. They look at the extinguished candle, the transience of life. But he spent most of his time looking at the lemon. The shell is so precise you can almost taste the bitterness. Life isn't just short, it's hard, it's sour. Celia found her voice. But it's also, she said, walking slowly toward him, the only source of light and color in the whole composition. The artist is saying, yes, life is bitter, but it's also vibrant and textured, and the most real thing on the canvas. Compared to it, death is just a secondary thought, dull and beige. The man's intense gaze softened, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. A slow, appreciative smile touched the corner of his mouth. That's a much better analysis than mine. It's just a different one, Celia said, blushing. I'm Celia Vega. I'm on the curatorial team. Dylan, he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and warm. Just Dylan, one guest. Are you enjoying the gala, Dylan? I hate galas, he said. So blunt it made Celia laugh. The noise, the voices, the number of people who look at art but never truly see it. Her eyes returned to the painting. They'd walk right past this. It's too small, not impressive enough. It's my favorite piece in this room, Celia admitted. Why? He asked. The question was simple, direct. He wasn't just chatting. I genuinely wanted to know. Because she's honest, Celia said, thinking of Ricardo, the divorce, the struggle. She doesn't pretend life is easy. It offers no false hope. It simply says, here it is, the bitter, the beautiful, and the end. Do with it what you will. I respect that. Dylan held my gaze for a long, heavy moment. It was a disturbing and deeply personal level of attention. She seemed to be cataloging her, reading her in a way that left her feeling completely exposed, yet understood. You have the eye of a restorer, Miss Vega, she said softly. You don't just see the surface, you see the truth beneath. Before I could answer, a man with a frantic-looking earpiece slipped into the room. Sir, Mr. Chevalier, we're just getting started. Dr. Alarcon is... She's waiting. Celia's blood ran cold. Chevalier stared in astonishment at the man beside her. Dylan Chevalier. The ghost. The benefactor. The man she'd been emailing for a year. Dylan's expression didn't change, but he gave her a small nod, almost apologetically. It seems my anonymity has ended, Miss Vega. Your analysis was refreshing. Perhaps you'll allow me to see the Vermeer through your eyes, after the formalities. Of course, Mr. Chevalier, she stammered, feeling foolish. He smiled again, a brief flash of warmth. Dylan, please. She turned and followed her assistant, his long, confident strides echoing across the marble floor. Celia was left alone in the gallery, her heart beating to a new and unfamiliar rhythm. She had just unknowingly impressed the most powerful man in the room, and he had impressed her. The energy in the great hall had shifted. The nervous buzz had solidified into palpable excitement. Dylan Chevalier was here. Celia watched from the back of the crowd as he was escorted to the small stage, shaking the doctor's hand at the chest and nodding politely at the sparse applause. She had a natural presence, exuding a quiet authority that required no effort. She didn't smile for the cameras. She didn't wave. She simply stood there, a picture of calm, while the doctor launched into a servile and excessively long introduction. Celia's mind was racing. Their conversation had been so normal, so real. It wasn't a phantom corporation. It was a man who loved art, who understood the symbolism of a Dutch vanitas, a man who stopped thinking. He wasn't a professional. He was the museum's biggest donor. She was a junior curator. She scanned the crowd, and her eyes inevitably landed on Ricardo. His reaction was pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw was slack. He was looking at Dylan Chevalier, then at Marcos Olmedo. Her face was pale. Clearly she had missed her chance. The man she had been trying to impress all night had been in the building for who knows how long, and Ricardo had been too busy acting to notice. Then Ricardo's gaze shifted, sweeping around the room until he found Celia. He saw her looking at him. He registered her proximity to the stage. His eyes narrowed. He was putting pieces together, but they were the wrong pieces. He saw her, personally, and he saw the most important man in the room, and his expression hardened. Dylan thankfully kept his speech brief. His voice, that smooth baritone, filled the room without him needing to shout into the microphone. He didn't talk about money or investments. She spoke about the responsibility that comes with wealth, the importance of preserving history, and the singular and brilliant talent of the museum's restoration team. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the back of the room, and for a heart-stopping second, Celia was certain she was looking right at her. The speech ended. The ribbon was cut. The men's wing was officially open. The crowd surged forward, a wave of tuxedos and gowns, all trying to get a moment with Dylan Chevalier, who was now stuck in a polite reception line with Dr. Alarcón. Celia knew this was her cue to get to work. She was scheduled to be in the new wing, available for questions. She slipped through the crowd, taking a side passage to avoid the bottleneck at the main entrance. She felt a hand grip her bare arm tightly. Oh, Celia. She turned around, her heart leaping in her throat. It was Ricardo. His smile was strained, his eyes cold. Carla was beside him, looking bored and fiddling with her phone. "Ricardo," Celia said, her voice strained. She tried to free his arm, but his grip tightened. "I have to admit it," she mocked, her voice low. "This is the lowest you've sunk, even for you. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, come on." Solo Personal mimicked his previous frightened tone. "Or are you trying a different angle? I saw you sneaking out of that side gallery with Chevalier. You're trying to sleep with him, aren't you?" The accusation was so vile, so typical of Ricardo, that Celia recoiled. "That's disgusting. I was working." "Let me go." "Working?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Is that what you call it?" Desperate, Celia. Truly desperate. "Do you think a man like that?" She nodded toward the stage. "A billionaire would think twice about some insignificant curator who can't even afford her own dress." The cram, the casual cruelty, the way he knew exactly where to cut, took her breath away. He knew that dress was borrowed from Sarah. "Ricardo, you're drunk," she said, trying to stay calm. "You're making a scene. I'm just getting started." His eyes blazed with a vengeful and terrible energy. He had been humiliated by losing his chance with Chevalier, and now he was going to take that humiliation and transfer it tenfold to her. It was his signature move. "Look at you," he said, his voice rising, drawing the attention of a few people nearby. "You're at the biggest party of the year, and you're part of the scenery. I gave you everything. I gave you a life, and you threw it away to go play with old dusty paints. I left you, Ricardo, or Celia, because you're a cruel, narcissistic bully. Now for the last time, let go of me." She pulled away from his arm, rubbing the red marks his fingers had left. Carla finally looked up from her phone. "Richie, stop. People are watching." "Let them watch," roared Ricardo. Now he was performing again. The inner circle of guests expanded. Celia saw Mrs. Allister watching with a look of deep aversion. She saw Dr. Alarcon looking over, her face pale with panic. "I want everyone to know," Ricardo announced, pointing at Celia as if presenting evidence. "This woman, my ex-wife, tried to tell everyone that I was a failure, that I was soulless, and look at her. Here she is as a helper, serving champagne at a party she could never have been invited to." "How does it feel, Celia? How does it feel to be a nobody?" Celia froze. It was a nightmare. Every fear she'd had about this night was coming true. The room spun. The faces of the donors, the trustees, the art critics, all looking at her, pitying her, judging her. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But she thought of the Vermeer. She thought of her 18-hour days. He thought of Mrs. Allister's kind words. He lifted his chin. "Could this be personal, Ricardo?" he said, his voice trembling but clear. "But I earned my place here. I'm not a guest because this wing is my job. I'm not a nobody. I'm the curator who built this." Ricardo threw his head back and laughed. It was a horrible braying sound. "Build it. You! You're a glorified assistant, Celia. You're nothing. You were nothing when I married you, and you're nothing now." "That's it!" A cold, calm voice cut through the air. "That's where you're profoundly mistaken." The effect was instantaneous. Laughter died in Ricardo's throat. The entire great hall, which had been chattering, seemed to fall silent. A void created by a sudden and massive shift in gravity. Dylan Chevalier moved through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea. He was no longer the quiet, contemplative man from the gallery. He radiated an aura of pure Arctic authority. His dark eyes weren't on the crowd, nor on Dr. Alarcon, but fixed solely on Ricardo Eduardo. He stopped right in front of them, standing so close to Ricardo that the taller, more powerfully built man actually took an involuntary step back. Dylan didn't look at Celia. She simply stood beside him, a silent, immovable wall. Ricardo's face, flushed red by the champagne and the vitriol, lost all color. He looked, Celia thought, like a man who had just watched his entire stock portfolio vanish. "Sir, Mr. Chevalier," Ricardo stammered, frantically trying to regain his composure. He extended a hand. "Ricardo Eduardo Capital. It's a real honor. I was just there. I was just talking to myself. With Celia." Dylan ignored the outstretched hand, letting it dangle in the air until Ricardo, his face burning, clumsily withdrew it. "Mr. Eduardo," Dylan said. Her voice was perfectly even, but it carried through the silent room. "I heard her assessment of Miss Vega's professional standing. A nobody. The help, nothing. It was a misunderstanding," Ricardo said, his eyes searching for an escape. He glanced at Carla, but she was staring at Dylan, completely mesmerized. "An inside joke. It didn't sound like a joke," Dylan retorted, his tone unchanged. Finally, he turned his head, only slightly, to look at Celia. His expression was unreadable, but his proximity was a shield. "Miss Vega, are you all right?" Celia, trembling, could only nod. "Good." Dylan turned all his attention back to Ricardo. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Eduardo, I am a man who values facts, so let's establish some. Fact. The woman you call nothing is, in fact, the only reason I am to this gala. The only reason this wing exists." Ricardo's mouth opened and closed. "Fact," Dylan continued. "Her assessment of her career as a quaint little hobby is amusing. Miss Vega's hobby involved identifying a forgery in my gin collection that 2 different auction houses had authenticated. She saved my corporation $80 million. Her game involved restoring the Vermeer you see there, a piece so delicate that every other expert in the world refused to touch it." As a collective gasp rose from the crowd, Dr. Alarcon looked as if she might faint. Celia stared at Dylan. She had known he was the benefactor, but she hadn't known he was the anonymous collector who had filed that forgery claim, the one that had been the talk of the art world. "Were you the gin customer?" Celia whispered. Dylan's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of warmth. It was. He turned to the shocked Ricardo. "And finally, the most important fact. You state, quite strongly, that Miss Vega could not be invited to this party." Dylan moved in a fluid motion to stand directly next to Celia. He didn't just stand near her. He bent down, and with a tenderness that made the whole room hold its breath, took her left hand in his own. "You're right, Mr. Eduardo. She's not a guest." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so possessive, so devastatingly intimate, that Celia's knees went weak. "She's the guest of honor," Dylan announced, his voice ringing with absolute purpose. Then he looked past Ricardo, past the astonished faces, and addressed the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the disturbance. Ricardo Eduardo of Eduardo Capital was attempting to publicly humiliate my fiancée." The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was a thunderous roar of total, unified shock. Ricardo Eduardo's face was a grotesque mask of disbelief. "Engaged?" she choked. That's impossible. It's a lie." "A lie?" Dylan's voice was lethal. He never took his eyes off Ricardo, but he was talking to Celia. "My love, I think this is your sign." Celia's mind was a whirlwind of activity. "Fiancé," his fiancé had called her. She looked at him, confused, terrified. And was it Esperanza? Dylan's dark eyes were gentle, urging her on. "Trust me." And Celia understood. It wasn't a lie. It was a secret. With a trembling hand, Celia rummaged in her small silk handbag. She glanced over her staff badge and lipstick. Her fingers closed around the small velvet-covered box that had been there, untouched, for 3 days. She'd been too scared to use it, too scared to believe it was real, too scared that everything was moving too fast. Now, in front of all of Madrid's high society, in front of the man who had called her nobody, she opened it. Inside, resting on the black velvet, was a ring. It wasn't a flashy celebrity diamond. It was a flawless cushion-cut sapphire, the color of a midnight sky, flanked by 2 simple, elegant diamonds. It was classic, timeless, and priceless. With Dylan's gaze fixed on hers, Celia took the ring from the box and, with a steady breath, slipped it onto the 4th finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly. He lifted his chin, his hand held high, the sapphire catching the light and flashing a bright, defiant blue. Dylan Chevalier smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. He wrapped his arm around Celia's waist, pulling her close. "Allow me to reintroduce everyone," he said, his voice ringing with pride. "This is Celia Vega, the most brilliant curator in the Western Hemisphere, and the soon-to-be Mrs. Dylan Chevalier." If the previous silence was a void, this was the stunned, resonant silence after a bomb explodes. Ricardo Eduardo's face flashed through a series of emotions so rapidly, it was almost comical. utter disbelief, pure fury, budding horror, and finally, a deep, repulsive shade of green. He looked at the ring, then at Celia's face, then at Dylan's protective, possessive posture. He wasn't just wrong. He was apocalyptically wrong. He hadn't been embarrassing a low-level staff member. She had been insulting the chosen partner of the most powerful, reserved, and respected man in the room. The man she had been desperate to meet. The man whose wallet was rumored to be 100 times smaller than her own. Carla was the first to react. Her perfectly painted mouth opened. "Oh my God," she gasped. Her eyes weren't on Celia, not even on her husband. They were on the ring. Her expression, a toxic mix of jealousy and calculation. Ricardo stammered, his hands flapping uselessly at his sides. "Fiancée Celia, this is a joke. You're lying. She's lying, Chevalier. She's a manipulator. He's deceiving you. He did the same to me." It was the desperate and pathetic maneuver of a cornered animal. Dylan didn't even flinch. He simply raised an eyebrow. "Are you fooling me, Mr. Eduardo? Doing your job with unparalleled brilliance? Impressing me with your integrity and passion when everyone else in this room wanted to impress me with their bank statements? You don't understand the game." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential, lethal whisper that only those in the immediate circle could hear. "She didn't tell you about us, did she? That's because you, Ricardo, are just a footnote in her life. A bad chapter she's already closed. You're so irrelevant to her new life that it didn't even occur to her to mention you." He turned to Celia, his entire demeanor softening. He brushed a lock of hair against her cheek, a gesture of such profound tenderness that it served as a final, brutal nail in Ricardo's coffin. "I apologize, mon amour," he murmured, loud enough for Ricardo to hear. "I was planning a much more romantic announcement during dinner in Paris, but this guy forced me to act." Then he looked over Ricardo's shoulder, his eyes finding Marcos Olmedo, the tech billionaire. "Marcos," Dylan called out in a pleasant voice. "It's good to see you. I'm afraid I won't be able to attend our meeting tomorrow. Any associate of Mr. Eduardo is unfortunately an associate I cannot trust. My team will be in touch to dissolve the preliminary acquisition talks. My apologies." Ricardo's world imploded. "No," she gasped, turning away. "Marcos, wait. It's a personal matter." "It has nothing to do with business." Marcos Olmedo, a shrewd man who hadn't gotten where he was by backing the wrong horse, simply shook his head in pure disgust. "You just publicly harassed Dylan Chevalier's fiancé, Eduardo. You called her out of the blue. Do you think that's personal? That's a character flaw, and it's fatal. We're done." Olmedo turned around and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ricardo was hyperventilating. You can't. That was a $300 million deal," he yelled at Dylan. It was. Dylan nodded, his voice cold. He took Celia's hand again. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my fiancée was promised a private tour of her own exhibition. Dr. Alarcón, who had been trembling with a mixture of terror and joy, stood at attention. "Yes, Mr. Chevalier. This way, Mr. Chevalier." "Miss Vega." Dylan wrapped his arm tightly around Celia's waist and led her away from the scene. The crowd of onlookers, donors, and critics parted before them, their faces a mixture of awe, respect, and, for Celia, newfound admiration. Celia didn't look back. She didn't need it. She could hear, behind her, the sound of Carla's voice, high-pitched and shrill. "Idiot! You absolute idiot, Ricardo! You ruined everything!" He heard the sound of a champagne glass shattering on the marble floor. She heard Ricardo Eduardo's voice, for the first time in her life, while being totally, completely, and devastatingly silent. Dylan led Celia, not to the new à la Chevalier, but back to the small, quiet Dutch gallery where they had first met. The moment the door closed behind them, sealing off the noise of the gala, Celia's legs gave way. Dylan caught her, his strong hands on her waist, guiding her to a velvet bench. "Breathe, Celia," he said gently, sitting down beside her. She was trembling, her head spinning. "Fiancée," he whispered, looking at the stunning heavy sapphire on her finger. "Dylan, what was that? You destroyed it." "He destroyed himself," Dylan said, his voice soft but firm. "He placed the dynamite and struck the match. I simply pointed out that I was holding her. But saying that, doing that, in front of everyone, our engagement. It's not real, is it? Isn't it?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a small black velvet box, the twin of the one that had been in his bag. Celia's jaw dropped. "I've been carrying this in my pocket for 3 days," Dylan said, his dark eyes intense. "Ever since it arrived from Cartier, I've been waiting for the right moment. I thought maybe tonight, after the gala, I'd take you to the rooftop garden. Or, like I said, I'd take you to Paris this weekend. I'm not always good with grand romantic gestures. I'm better with facts." He took her hand. "The fact is, Celia Vega, I've been half in love with you for a year. From your first brilliant, passionate, and mildly insubordinate email about the Vermeer restoration," Celia laughed, a choked, watery sound. "I wasn't insubordinate. I was steadfast." "You were," he agreed. "You told my assistant, and I quote, 'Mr. Chevalier's chronology is irrelevant. The canvas will tell me when it's ready. Art doesn't bow to a quarterly report.' It was the most refreshing thing I'd read in a decade. Celia's mind was racing, connecting the dots. The client from Geneva. It was you. That's why you funded the ALA. That was the initial reason I funded the ALA," he corrected. "I was impressed by your eye. Then, I asked to meet you, 3 months ago. The consultant from the Chevalier Foundation," Celia breathed, recalling their first meeting over coffee. "The handsome, quiet man named Dylan, who said he was just reviewing the foundation's philanthropic portfolios. I wasn't entirely honest," he admitted. "I told you I was an employee because I wanted to meet you, Celia." No to the junior curator trying to impress a donor. I wanted to meet the woman who wrote those emails, the woman who saw the truth in a 400-year-old painting. Her secret. It had been her secret. The last 3 months had been a whirlwind. Quiet dinners in secluded restaurants. Evening strolls through Retiro Park, discussing art, history, and life. His trips to Madrid, ostensibly for business, but always ending with a knock on his apartment door. She had fallen in love with Dylan, the thoughtful, brilliant, and intensely private man of the foundation. She had no doubt. She'd had a hunch that he was the Dylan Chevalier. Not until he'd walked into her office 2 weeks ago did she see the final restoration. And he said, "She's perfect. You're perfect. And I haven't been telling you the whole truth." He had confessed everything. Who was she? Why had he sought her out? And how unexpectedly he had fallen completely in love with her. 3 days ago, he had given her the ring box. "I ask you to consider it," she had said, her voice unusually nervous. "I know who I am. I know the world I live in." "It's a gilded cage, much like this one. I don't want to trap you, Celia, but I find it impossible to live in it without you. Don't give me an answer. Not yet. Just keep it. And know that it's real." She had kept it, hidden away, terrified by what it meant. And tonight, Ricardo. Ricardo had given her the answer. "Did you know he'd be here?" he said, finally understanding. "Did you know he was my ex-husband? I'm a man who values facts," Dylan repeated. "I do my research. I knew who he was. I knew what he did to you. I knew he was on the board. And I knew I'd be here. I guess I expected you to ignore me. But also, I prepared myself for the possibility that you wouldn't. You were protecting me," she whispered. "I'm protecting us," he corrected, his thumb caressing the sapphire on his finger. "I called you Mr. Nobody." I wanted him and the world to know that I had thrown away the most valuable person I'd ever known. I needed to understand, beyond any doubt, that his opinion is, and always will be, irrelevant. He stood up, pulling her to her feet. She framed his face with her hands, her gaze fixed on his. "But that was an act. For them," she said, her voice low and raspy. This is for us," she said, slipping the ring off her finger. "Celia Vega," she added, and her voice, the voice that had intimidated a courtroom and dissolved a $300 million deal, was filled with emotion. "Do you see the truth in everything? Do you see the light in the shadows? You have restored more than my paintings. You have restored me. He thought your passion was a weakness. I know it's your greatest strength. Will you marry me?" "Really?" No audience, no ex-husbands. Just you and me. Tears streamed down Celia's face. All the fear, the humiliation, the years of feeling small and worthless. It all vanished. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't just an assistant. She was Celia Vega, and she was loved. "Yes!" she cried, laughing and sobbing at the same time. "Dylan, yes! 1,000 times yes!" He slipped the ring back onto her finger, the sapphire returning to its place, this time forever. And in the quiet, empty gallery, surrounded by the Dutch masters, Dylan Chevalier kissed his fiancée. It wasn't a chaste, public kiss on the hand. It was deep and passionate, and it was a beginning. They stayed in the quiet, shaded sanctuary of the Dutch gallery for a long time. The door was closed. The thick oak and velvet soundproofing was a barrier against the world they had just turned upside down. The distant, muffled murmur of the party felt as if it came from another life. Celia finally let go, sinking into the velvet bench, the same one where she had first sat, as Miss Vega, the curator. Now she sat as Celia, the fiancée, and the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. She was still trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her hands ice cold and her mind numb. Dylan sat beside her, not intruding, but his presence was a solid, warm wall. He said nothing, simply waiting, giving her the gift of silence. He used to do that," she whispered, her voice cracking. She stared at the floor, at the intricate pattern of the parquet, unable to look at the priceless art or the priceless man beside her. In public, at his office parties, he introduced me as his little fan. He would tell his associates how quaint it was that I played with my dusty books while he was building the world. He made me feel so small, so stupid, as if my passion were a character flaw. She took a shaky breath, the dam of years of composure finally breaking. The night I left, the final night, she had just received a research article, published in the Art History Review. She was so proud. I'd been working on it for a year. I showed it to him, and he looked at the cover and said, "That's great, honey. Did you see what the market did today? I made more money for us in the last hour than you'll ever make in your entire life." He threw it on the coffee table and knocked over a wine glass. It stained the entire front page. She was crying now, silent, hot tears of revived humiliation. He didn't even apologize. He just sighed, as if I had upset him. That was all. That's when I knew. It wasn't just that he didn't respect my work. He didn't respect me. And tonight, when he grabbed me, I was back in that apartment, with the spilled wine and that look of utter contempt on his face. I was that small, stupid person again. Dylan's hand, which had been resting on the bench, finally moved. He didn't pat her on the shoulder. He didn't offer a platitude. He took her left hand, the one with the ring, and held it firmly in his own. His palms were warm and strong. He lifted it, turning it over, tracing the veins of her wrist with his thumb as he studied the sapphire. As if it were a piece of art, he was etching into his memory. "She'll never speak to you again," Dylan said. His voice wasn't the warm baritone of the gallery, nor the passionate whisper of his proposal. It was flat, cold, and utterly final. It was the voice of a man who moved markets, who built and dissolved empires with a single phone call. "She will never again be in the same room as you," he continued, his dark eyes finally lifting to meet his. There was fury in them, but it was a controlled, arctic fury, more terrifying than Richard's loud, braying rage. "The Museum Council will convene an emergency ethics session tomorrow morning. I will attend via video call. They will be given a choice, their sponsorship or the Chevalier Endowment. They will choose the endowment. He'll be removed from the council by lunchtime." Celia's breath caught. "Dylan, you don't have to." "I don't have to," he nodded. "But I will. His deal with Marcos Olmedo is dead. I will make sure that any other partner in my sphere is aware of the character risk involved in a partnership with Eduardo Capital. He didn't just insult you, Celia. He threatened my future wife. He laid his hands on her. You will discover that the world you built is suddenly and permanently very, very cold. That part of your life, the part where you are small, is over, I promise you." She leaned down and with a tenderness that broke her heart, kissed the tears from her cheeks. "You're not an amateur, mon amour. You're a master. Now, shall we go home?" When they finally left, the Eiffel party was unrecognizable. The grand ballroom was nearly empty, the air thick with the scent of dying lilies and spilled champagne. The remaining guests, the diehards, those who would never leave a party as long as the alcohol was free, were huddled near the bar. As Dylan and Celia walked toward the main staircase, a hush fell. Whispers were audible. "That's her. The fiancée. Eduardo is ruined." Chevalier simply, "My God." They didn't just part the crowd. The crowd recoiled as if from a source of intense gravity, all desperate to see, yet terrified of being seen. Celia saw Mrs. Allister, the old money patron, standing near the cloakroom. The old woman caught Celia's eye. She didn't smile. She simply gave a slow, deep, approving nod. It was a sign of respect, a welcome. Dr. Alarcón, who had clearly been expecting them, approached nervously, her face a mess of sweat, astonishment, and terror. "Mr. Chevalier, Miss Vega, Celia." "Me, my God, heavens, congratulations." That's just the word. I had no idea. This is simply amazing. "Thank you, Dr. Alarcón," Celia said, surprised to hear her own voice, firm and warm. The trembling was gone. "It's been a remarkable evening. In fact," said Dylan, sliding his hand down his small back, "and it's given me time to think. Dr. Alarcón, I was very impressed with the Chevalier wing. But from my conversations with Celia, it's clear that the entire restoration department is operating on a very tight budget. That changes. Starting tomorrow, Dr. Alarcon would freeze. "Sir, Mr. Chevalier, I'm doubling the foundation's endowment," said Dylan, as casually as if ordering coffee. "But it will be restructured. The new funds will establish a state-of-the-art technical analysis lab. They will provide 2 new fellowship positions, sir, and create a new director-level position to oversee everything. A salary befitting a top-tier financial CEO, not an amateur." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "That new director, of course, will be Celia. She will have autonomous and total control over the department, its acquisitions, and its research. She will report directly to the board, not to a subcommittee." I trust these terms are acceptable. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. Dr. Alarcon, a woman who had spent her career begging for scraps, looked like she was about to faint. "Acceptable? Mr. Chevalier, it's a miracle." "Yes, of course. Celia." "Director Vega, this is wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you, Dr. Alarcon," said Celia, squeezing her arm. "I look forward to discussing the details." Dylan nodded once. "My office will send the documentation." He didn't expect another servile response. He guided Celia down the grand marble steps. His pace was unhurried. The walk felt different. Her heels clicked with a new and definite sound. She wasn't running away. She was leaving. At the foot of the steps, near the cloakroom, he saw it. Ricardo. It was a collapsed ruin. He was slumped on a velvet bench. His tuxedo, worth thousands of dollars, once his armor of power, was now hopelessly wrinkled. His perfectly sculpted blonde hair was disheveled where he'd been clutching it. An empty, overturned champagne glass lay beside his scuffed shoes. He was alone. Utterly and profoundly alone. As if she sensed it, she looked up. Her eyes were red, hollow with disbelief and pure, undiluted panic. She saw them. He saw Celia, not in the plain dress he had mocked, but in what now seemed a statement of supreme and understated elegance. He saw her, radiant and serene, head held high. She saw the impossible midnight blue sapphire flashing in her hand, and she saw it being held possessively by the man whose single, calm word had just vaporized her entire life. She saw the woman she had called nothing standing on the precipice of inheriting the world. Celia met his gaze. She searched within herself for any lingering emotion, for the triumph she thought she would feel, for the pity she should feel, for the anger she had a right to feel. She found nothing. It wasn't forgiveness. It was, as Dylan had said, irrelevance. The space he had occupied in her heart and mind, the space that had caused her so much pain, was simply empty. It was a footnote, a bad chapter, a painting she had restored, and then turned the page on. She turned away from him, breaking eye contact, and walked out through the imposing bronze doors into the fresh night air. An Hélène, an elegant black Bentley. Not a taxi, not an Uber, but a private car. I was waiting on the sidewalk. The driver, a man with the understated professionalism of a Secret Service agent, held the door. Dylan helped her inside, his warm hand in hers. The heavy door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, enclosing them in a world of rich leather, polished wood, and absolute, perfect silence. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the museum, the party, and her old life, Celia let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 5 years. "Charles," Dylan said to the driver, his voice returning to its normal warm timbre, "to the airfield. Prepare the jet for Paris." Celia turned her head toward him. Paris? Tonight? Dylan, I don't have a passport. I don't have any clothes. He smiled, a genuine, delighted smile that lit up his dark eyes. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out not one, but 2 navy blue passports. He handed her one. My love, my staff packed a bag for you 3 days ago, just in case you said yes. It's already on the plane. I am, as I said, a man who prepares. Were you so sure? She gasped, dazed. No, he said, his expression softening. I was so hopeful. However, I'm also hungry. And the jet's catering is good, but it's not what I'm craving. Charles, find the best, greasiest takeaway cheeseburger you can find between here and Teterboro, and a chocolate milkshake. Celia? She laughed, a real laugh, bubbly and joyful, that felt strange and wonderful. A strawberry milkshake, she managed to say. A strawberry milkshake, Dylan confirmed, and he lay back, taking her hand. I still owe you a proper proposal, he said quietly, as the car sped toward the West Side Highway. One without an audience, and without a villain. On the Pont des Arts, perhaps. At dawn, Celia rested her head against his shoulder, the soft wool of her tuxedo against her cheek. She gazed at the twinkling sapphire, then to the man who had put him there. Dylan, he whispered, what you did there wasn't just a proposition. You didn't just give me a ring. You gave me back my name. You gave me back my job. You brought me back to myself. How can Paris ever top that? It won't, she murmured, kissing the top of his head. It will simply be ours. But for the record, I think tonight was simply perfect. Celia closed her eyes, the city lights blurring as she walked past. She thought about the Vanitas painting, the skull, the candle, the lemon. Ricardo had been the skull, a dull, dry, beige secondary thought. But his life, now, was the lemon. Vibrant, textured, a little sour from the past, but very, very real. And for the first time in a long time, it was bathed in the brightest, most beautiful light. Meaningful closure. And so, Ricardo Eduardo learned that the loudest voice at the candle isn't necessarily the most powerful. He tried to extinguish Celia's light, forgetting that she was the one who created it. His world, built on ego and intimidation, collapsed with a single, calm word. Celia's revenge wasn't loud. It was the undeniable and radiant fact of her happiness. Ultimate success isn't just about rising above those who tried to bring you down. It's about finding someone who sees your true worth, even when you've forgotten it yourself. Audience interaction. What did you think of Ricardo's instant karma? Have you ever seen someone so arrogant fall so perfectly? Tell us your favorite part of the story in the comments below. Call to action. And if you loved Celia's incredible story of empowerment, please do me a huge favor. Like this video. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice and new beginnings. Thanks for listening.